squad of diverse, well-adjusted and altruistic young men, led by the inspirational Gareth Southgate, have struck a modest tone and stuck to their principles. Taking the knee before matches despite the boos has shown their unequivocal support for Black Lives Matter. No one here is going to knock anyone for a display of anti-racism, but some question whether every game needs to be harnessed for political purposes, and many more are uncomfortable with the BLM movement's radical ideas, such as defunding the police. My next guest also fears that the movement encourages division, not unity. The exact opposite, in other words, of Gareth Southgate's squad. Well, Wanjiru Njoya has written a book called Economic Freedom and Social Justice. She joins me and the panel now. Thank you so much for joining us on such a big night. Tell us your thoughts at this point.
I think any focus on race is inherently divisive, because it's saying I have certain rights depending on my race that don't belong to people of a different race. So that's where I think the idea of division comes. I just disagree with the idea that you can achieve unity by focusing on your personal characteristics that other people don't share.
In years past, when I was younger, football was often associated with a pretty nasty bunch of people who, frankly, were very racist. So even if they were looked down upon by most of the UK, there was an element that football was not representative of the most tolerant aspects of Great Britain at its best. Do you see that even if it is a bit laboured, perhaps to say the least in some senses, that the fact that footballers are leading the anti-racist charge is important when you look at the big picture?
Well, I'm no expert on football, I'm afraid, but I just disagree with the idea that you change behavior by focusing on race. If you want to say people should behave better, people should be polite, people should be courteous, that should always be the case. That should always apply. It shouldn't be to be linked to people's race or whatever other personal characteristics. I'm pretty sure everyone, whatever race they come from or whatever other characteristics they have encountered people who are not behaving towards them as they ought. And so I think there's an argument that people should behave differently from the way they behave, but that is not to say that it's an issue to do with race. And particularly from my perspective, writing about academic law, I do not agree that this should be the main focus of legislation.
In your writings, you suggest that not only are the policies advocated by Black Lives Matter harmful in general, but that they're actually counterproductive and particularly bad for the black community. Explain that to us and maybe mention a policy or two that causes you concern.
I think the evidence is clear that the people who need police protection most, the people in the most vulnerable communities, are the black communities. I think the evidence is clear that the victims of crime are predominantly in the black community. I think the idea that you can help black communities by defunding the police is preposterous. In terms of fundraising, I think there have been many debates around that because nobody is clear where the money is going to. Is it focused on health? Is it focused on education? It seems to many people to be funding political campaigns. But I just want to make clear that my focus in my book is not to do with the tactics of Black Lives Matter. It's to do with whether we should have legislation backing the policies of movements like Black Lives Matter. Because I think there's a big difference between what you do in communities, whether you're trying to achieve behavior modification or whatever else it is, between doing that and, on the other hand, saying we need some kind of legislation to back this up, which is what I see the Equality Act doing. And I think it's misconceived.
Wanjiru, and I here, I've got just two questions really quickly. The first question, you talk about focusing on race being divisive, but isn't racism itself more divisive? Isn't that the fundamental problem that people are, in their own roundabout and challenging way, trying to grapple with? And the second question is, do you think it's the notion of race itself, this idea that racial difference is meaningful and significant, that we should be challenging, really going further than critiquing identity politics or Black Lives Matter, but actually deconstructing the notion of race itself as something that should meaningfully organise society?
Looking at it from my perspective in academic law, I don't have a problem with anybody saying my race is important to me, my racial identity is important to me, and I want to band together with people who share my race so we can, I don't know, sit together and talk about our race. Fine. If that's what people want to do. What I disagree with is not identity politics as such, but the idea that public policy and legislative policy should be constructed around race. That is fundamentally wrong. You can't make laws that give people special protection because of their race, or because of whatever other characteristics they have. That is a completely different question than the question whether people should consider personally their racial identity to be important. I would not have a debate with anybody who said, well, actually, my racial identity is important to me. That's fine. It's the idea that you impose that on other people that I think is the main problem. Going back to Black Lives Matter, taking the knee, I think that in a free society, you can kneel down anytime you want to for any reason. I think the problem people have with taking the knee is when some people put pressure on others to kneel down when they don't want to, or when they try and make moral judgments about them, depending on whether they're taking the knee or not. That's where the problem comes in. It's the coercion surrounding racial identity that's the problem, not people's personal feeling of racial identity.
Hi, Dr. Wanjiru. It's Becca. I've donated money to Black Lives Matter because as a white person who wanted to be a kind of ally to anti-Black racism, I felt that it was a compelling movement for kind of platforming the Black experience that previously has been kind of kept and controlled by kind of white narrative. So if that is not the case, what is the most effective means of kind of allyship for white people who want to work to combat anti-racism and anti-Black racism in this case particularly?
Be an ally if you want to be an ally. Nobody is saying that nobody should be an ally if they feel that they want to be an ally. The problem is when you start trying to coerce people to join you in the allyship. That's the problem. So, for example, people they are not happy with mandatory training programs that say, we're going to teach you how to be an ally, and this is mandatory. It's training and you have to do it. And here are the books you have to read. And here are the people. You have to be an ally with these people. It is the coercion that people are against, not the idea of being an ally. It's a free society and you can make friends with anyone you want to make friends with. But to try and coerce other people into joining in the movement is very wrong. That's what people have a problem with.
Last quick question. We know that there is a religious penalty within the labour market against Muslim women wearing a hijab in particular. You say that we shouldn't have specific policies targeting particular racial or religious or ethnic groups. But when you do have a case where there is evidence, or strong evidence to demonstrate genuine discrimination and disadvantage based off of someone's characteristic, how do you respond to that?
You respond exactly the way that everybody else responds when they apply for a job and they don't get it for whatever reason. That's life. Sometimes you apply to a job and the person doesn't want to hire you for whatever reason. And what do? You apply for a different job and that person wants to hire you. Fantastic. That's how you make a deal. It's a voluntary exchange on both sides. And that's how life continues for everybody. I disagree with the idea that particular people need special protection for the difficulties that they encounter in the labor market, and other people are just left to get on with it as best they can. If you're going to protect people, protect everyone. You don't pick specific groups and say, well, you're going to get special protection. But the other thing that's really important, I think, is a voluntary a freedom of contract, basically, that both sides want to be in the bargain. So if one side says, well, I don't want to be in this bargain, you don't say, well, I'm forcing you to be in this bargain because I think the person wants to deal with you needs some kind of special protection. So in that context, my book is also a defense of freedom of contract. Yes, you could say it's not very nice. You want to do a deal with this person and they've rejected you and you're going to have to try again elsewhere. That's how everybody lives their life. And it's great because you'll make a better match.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wanjiru Njoya. Thank you very much for joining us.
Welcome to the GB News YouTube channel. You can watch us live 24 hours a day, catch up on your favourite shows and join in the conversation in the comments below.
Don't forget to subscribe and you'll never miss any of our exclusive content.